Right, the book is Rereading Revelation, Theology, Ethics, and Resistance. Can I ask you why the title Rereading Revelation? I guess why do we need a rereading and why does a rereading maybe feel to you to be especially necessary right now?
Riley, I don't know if you need a rereading.
I
I
probably do.
needed a rereading.
Okay.
And thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've been working on Revelation my whole academic career. My
Okay.
doctoral dissertation was 1995. So um, I've worked on Revelation more than anything else, individual thing. Um, so part of it is acknowledging that I've been working on it a long time and I'm still thinking and changing my mind about some things, but even more, I think seeing it in a new context.
Okay.
And so that's what sort of holds the book together. It's a set of essays, right? Each chapter is a different subtopic with Revelation. And where am I at this point with it?
Can I ask you, for just interest sake, who is your doctoral supervisor when you were writing on Revelation?
Yeah, I worked with Fernando Segovia at Vanderbilt.
Okay, I don't know that name, but clearly he was a Revelation scholar.
No,
Oh, not at all. Okay.
no. He at the time I started grad school was primarily known as a John
Okay.
person, but he also really was a pioneer in calling attention to the language we were using back in the 90s was how social location affects interpretation.
Okay.
So, if you're reading the Bible from a particular set of cultural lenses, there are going to be some insights, but also maybe some things that you're not self-aware of. How do we take advantage of the diversity of readers? And so that's been, I think, the thing he would be best known for in
Okay.
the film. Yeah.
Any influences, you were writing in the 90s, but you've continued to study it through time.
Mhm.
Any contemporary, I don't know, ancient, whoever influences for you in Revelation? I'll just mention a name that always stands out for me, and it wasn't so much a verse by verse commentary as
Mhm.
much as, different than yours and that not essays, but more, I guess, chapter by chapter kind of
Sure.
thing. Daryl Johnson. I don't know if that's a name that's
I don't
you've
know
ever heard of.
Daryl Johnson on
Okay, he's
Revelation, but it
he's
sounds
been
like I should.
in Regent for a lot of years,
Yeah.
in Vancouver, and
Yeah.
it's called Discipleship on the Edge. It's very socio rhetorical, like lots of
Okay.
historical context. That one early on really grabbed my attention, and it was just written maybe in a way that was different than reading a Beale commentary. Like it was again, it read kind of more like yours, where it felt a little novelistic, like a
Right.
layperson could get through it
Well,
and learn
thank you for
some.
saying that because we try we try to do that.
Okay,
Uh,
yeah, I think that's
yeah.
absolutely what you got here.
Um, you asked about influences.
Mhm.
When I was starting to work on Revelation, I was fascinated how many different kinds of Christian radicals had done a lot with Revelation. So
Okay.
one was Alan Bozak, who's a
Okay.
black South African pastor, jailed, tortured, resisting apartheid, who wrote about Revelation from that context.
Okay, I thought you were gonna mean radical in like a radical, like, yeah, I don't know, like this is the time of the return, or like kind of
Oh,
radical revelatory ideas, but you mean just a radical believer.
yeah, and reading Revelation in our own time and place, making
Okay.
those connections. Daniel Berrigan, who was a Catholic priest and protester against nuclear weapons in the
Okay.
Vietnam War, wrote a book on Revelation. And you just wouldn't expect that coming from my background,
Mhm.
former Southern Baptist. And those kinds of readings started opening me up to the way that Revelation is engaged with its own time and place and the circumstances in which John was writing.
This the former Southern Baptist piece. I won't ask you right now, but I'd be interested
Sure.
to know how that has influenced maybe your thoughts on Revelation through the years. When people think of Revelation, they imagine a lot of end time, charts, timelines, beasts. What do you think
Right.
is the most misunderstood part or parts about this book?
I think the most misunderstood thing about Revelation is that it really was written primarily, just like Paul's letters were, for the Christians who would hear it read aloud first. And that is people in John's orbit. He identifies himself as a prophet in what he calls Asia. We would call that Roman province, Western, Southwestern Turkey today. And he's addressing those seven assemblies or churches of followers of Jesus who are gathering in those cities. Even at the beginning of the book, he emphasizes, these are things that are about to happen soon. And so, yes, he is concerned with how history will turn out. He's interested in what lies beyond death. Those things are definitely true. But he's not projecting onto the sky like an outline of the course of history for 2000 or 2500 years later. He's talking about his own crisis.
Are there misunderstandings that you can look back on in your own life that have been cleared up as you've studied it more and more? Uh, or I don't know, assumptions that you made early on that have kind of cleared up or changed for you?
Sure. I think, first of all, for someone who just picks up Revelation and starts reading it without background or context, it's a tough read, right? We have to acknowledge that it can be a tough read. But I think when I first read it, as really like as a high school kid and in college, I was so ready to see it as predicting a,
Okay.
a future course of history. But the biggest surprise was that at the end of Revelation, God comes to earth, right? The New Jerusalem comes to earth. It's not a book about dying and going to heaven someday. It's a book about being faithful and the way God will renew the world we live in now.
When did that change occur for you? Like in
Wow.
those early readings or in seminary, or was there some kind of moment that was an epiphany for you?
Somewhere in the neighborhood of seminary,
Okay.
somewhere in there. But for me, I don't know about you, changing my perspective rarely happens in a minute.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, almost everything, there's a series of experiences that I couldn't even put together what the
Okay.
sequence would be.
Are you ever, I imagine always think this, that as a scholar, I keep running into a lot of scholars who are just more humble than I could imagine. But I always think like it must be hard to sit in a pew and not be a little critical sometimes of the things being preached when you're like, I don't know if you know the name Rick Watts. Uh,
Hmm.
okay. Rick did obviously the Isaiah's New Exodus and Mark. I was at the same church as Rick for a while in
Okay.
Vancouver. I always thought, we were preaching through the Gospel of Mark. I think I was like, what is it like to be Rick and sitting in the crowd? But again, a very humble man. But are there things when you sit under people preaching Revelation that particularly, I don't know, from the pulpit make you squirm a little or
The first thing I would say, Riley, is I know what you're talking about as a New Testament scholar hearing sermons, but I and everybody I know who's a Christian is there to hear from God.
yeah,
And so, yeah, okay, sometimes we hear something and it rubs our fur the wrong way, but that is not why we're there. We're not
for
grading.
sure. Yeah. Well,
Um,
that's where I think I have it
yeah,
wrong on how I think a scholar would be in that room. But still I wonder if there's things that preachers commonly say about, not one particular example
right.
in terms of a preacher, this preacher, that
Mm.
preacher, but things that come from the pulpit that maybe even in this book you hoped to bring some clarity to.
In the world I'm in, which is mostly mainline ecumenical white
Mhm.
churches, preachers avoid Revelation.
Okay.
So I have not heard that much preaching. I have heard preaching where preachers are basically just repeating talking points that they've heard all their lives,
Okay.
but haven't gotten into it on their own. Yeah, for sure. And of course, we've all heard the TV preachers trying to sell their next book or get donations by saying, well, Jesus is returning next Thursday, best I can tell. Um, but I'm not hearing that in churches.
Okay.
Most of the time, I'm hearing people avoid it.
Okay. So even that then maybe is a goal here of this book
Yeah.
to make it more accessible, whether to lay people or to the preacher.
If there's one core argument, it's that that holds the book together, it's that we need to hear revelation these days.
Okay.
It poses questions that, and I say questions, I don't think Christians should just read Revelation, take notes, and try to download it and do this.
Hmm.
We have to ask how Revelation relates to our own time and place. It's not as simple as just that. But there's not another book in the New Testament that poses the question of, what does loyalty mean? Loyalty to Jesus mean when the world is not running according to your vision of what that kind of faithfulness involves?
Yeah.
What kind of action is called for when you feel like you're confronted with, and Revelation uses the beast or the monster, when you're confronted with monstrous evil. And, Revelation puts those questions right in front of you.
You describe, I mean, it's in the title, Revelation as a text of resistance.
Mhm.
What kind of resistance did John, do you imagine he envisioned for his original audience?
May I have permission to go around the block once before I get
Absolutely.
right to your question? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, as you would know, Riley, but a lot of people won't. Revelation's one of quite a few ancient Jewish and Christian apocalypses, right? These books that describe a vision with strange symbols and often a lot of violence and scary stuff, dream visions, conversations with heavenly beings, and all that. Um, Revelation is one of quite a few, and that's important because it helps us compare Revelation to others and sort of know how it works. Like, we would compare Acts to an ancient history. We, Revelation looks like these. Um, and what Revelation and the other apocalypse are often doing, Revelation is doing, is it's preoccupied with the Roman Empire and the culture it creates. So Revelation describes Rome as a monster, a beast, also as a prostitute, accuses Rome of being violent, idolatrous, exploitative, murderous, antagonistic toward God. And if you're living in one of those cities in Roman Asia, hearing Revelation, the question is, okay, here you are in this society, is completely wrapped up in Roman commerce, Roman religious culture, Roman propaganda. Um, what are you going to do? How are you going to follow Jesus in a society that, from the point of view of Revelation, is just completely corrupt?
What role does the lamb play theologically in Revelation?
Yeah,
With this idea of resistance still, like especially as a kind of a counter image to empire and to domination.
right. I mean, Revelation is probably written to a very small group of Jesus followers,
Okay.
and it introduces Jesus in chapter 5 as a lamb who's been slaughtered and yet still stands, will continue to stand, stands before God's throne, alive forever after having been slaughtered. If you think about it, those little circles of early Christians are not gonna like form an army and resist Rome.
Hmm.
That's just not there. But what can they do? Well, Revelation asks them to do some pretty specific things. In chapter 18, it says, "Come out from her." Just don't associate with any of the aspects of the empire that are murderous or idolatrous or exploitative. Just don't. And it also says in chapter 11 that the followers of the Lamb conquered because of the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. In other words, what you do is you just live in and tell the truth,
Hmm.
even at the risk of your life or at the risk of a very hard time. So when Revelation introduces the Lamb, John is there in the heavenly throne room. He's told that he's about to see a lion, the Lion of Judah. And then he looks, very next verse after the lion, he looks, and what he sees is this lamb that's been slaughtered and is yet still alive. The way I read that is Revelation is using these poetic symbols to interpret God's power and how God's working in the world. So if you think the world is completely off track and it's run by corrupt, wicked, murderous people, you might want God to act like a lion, right? Run around, tear everything up, slaughter, kill, destroy. That's not what Revelation never gives you the lion. It's just the lamb all the time, right? From here on out, is the lamb conquers by his own testimony, by his own truthfulness. And God raises him from the dead. That's his victory. It's very different than sort of a warlike, destructive, dominance-oriented way of responding to the world.
How does Revelation's vision of worship, because there's a lot of worship, I mean, from the
Yeah.
beginning to the end, how does that differ from what many modern Christians today would practice or imagine with regards
That
to
is,
worship?
that's a great question, Riley, and I haven't thought about it in just that way. The worship scenes in Revelation are all directly focused on God and the Lamb.
Hmm.
There's a great deal of singing. There's prayer and incense. Um, there's songs of praise and songs of victory are the things being sung. Um, just a singular focus on God and the Lamb, and even, other heavenly beings are there participating in that worship. Well, what I guess I would say in terms of our own worship context now, um, I don't know that it's wrong that in our churches we spend a lot of time also focusing on one another and building community. But I think it is a good litmus test of worship of how much of a focus on God or how much of a focus on Jesus is happening here.
Yeah.
How much is God receiving praise and gratitude?
We always go to Acts 2, obviously, for,
Mhm.
what does the church look like in terms of its gatherings? But do you think, just thinking as you talked about worship in Revelation, do you think Revelation gives us somewhat of a template for worship on earth?
I don't think of Revelation that way as like telling us how.
Okay.
Um, I think Revelation's giving us images, right? That can be inspiring. One of the great images of worship in Revelation is every tribe and people
Mm.
and language and nation, right? You get this globally diverse, not divided group of people worshiping together. As I said a minute ago, you get this just absolute focus on the goodness of God, the goodness of the Lamb, their worthiness for worship. That's beautiful too. Um, that's different than, and this is what it should look like. You should have a sermon, or you should always do the Lord's Supper. That's not what Revelation's doing.
Mm. But it gives us somewhat of this, yeah, this picture. I think you said that,
Mhm.
like, even thinking of the Lord's Prayer, like, in heaven as it is on earth. Like, here
Yes.
is something to, not a step by step, but to imitate, to move toward. As you say, like maybe a recalibrating based on this vision where God is central, or Jesus is
I,
central.
and, I would even add interactive, like there's
Yeah.
the smell of the incense, the prayers of the saints are there being received. So, one article I read a couple of years ago, and I'm not remembering the author's name, compared the scenes in Revelation to an ancient theater, a
Okay.
Greco-Roman theater, where you have a chorus and you have singing and crowd participation. This is not passive worship in Revelation, right? All these crowds are there joyfully singing. Um, I don't know about you, but because I'm a seminary professor, I visit a lot of churches.
Okay.
And one of the first things I notice is, do they sing?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. Because again, thinking of, not a step by step, but how do they worship? in the heavenly places. Clearly, singing is a not just some kind of illusion, like they are singing praises
And
to God.
shouting. They're singing and shouting. Um, I certainly don't assume that early Christian worship was tame.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I do think a lot of the things that sometimes I see in churches are not about glorifying God.
Okay.
And that's what I need.
Hmm. What parallels do you see between Rome's imperial power and modern systems today of dominance and consumerism? Are there parallels there?
There definitely are. So, one of John's criticisms of Rome, and you get this especially in chapters 13, 17, and 18. No one can buy or sell unless they have the mark of the beast. Or in chapters 17 and 18, when the great city is destroyed, the people who lament are the people who are getting rich or powerful off of the system of commerce. And Revelation, even it's 18, 11 to 13, gives a list of what are the luxury items that these um, sailors are transporting around the Mediterranean. And it's just luxury, gold, silver, jewels, pearls, fine fabrics, fine spices and scents, expensive meats. The list even goes on to military items, chariots, horses. And then the final thing in the list, it says, and slaves, human lives. And I don't think we're supposed to look for, well, what is that in our world exactly? But to ask, if that's the monster and the prostitute in John's day, what's monstrous in our day? What kind of world do we live in where you have just what's being condemned about Rome is it's using people as pawns.
Yeah.
You have just a very few people, incredible wealth. And we're living at a moment, I would note, of the greatest wealth inequality this country's ever seen. And also, we're the most divided from each other we've ever been.
Mm.
I don't think those are coincidences. And I'm not attributing that to Revelation, but that's one of the items that Revelation would confront you with. Can you participate in a system that eats other people up? Um, Another, I would say, is that question of loyalty.
Yeah.
Um, the beast gets loyalty in Revelation and gets worship. And when do we Christians confuse um, our loyalty to Jesus with our loyalty to other values? Whether it's our commercial system or a political party or a particular cause, can we remember Jesus isn't inside that thing, he's above it? That would be one of Revelation's challenges.
Is it fair to ask today, like what are the beasts for us that the church must discern and resist today?
Wow. I don't like the exercise of pinning the tail on the beast, but I will name some basic things. Almost everybody, at least in the United States, regardless of their politics, agrees that there are people who are using their extraordinary wealth to make sure other resources aren't available to a lot of people.
Mm.
That would include medical care that doesn't make you so indebted you can't thrive for the rest of your life. It would include access to healthy food. It would include things like access to beautiful places rather than having them gobbled up. Um, it would include, I think, especially include employment situations where people are just dramatically taken advantage of,
Okay.
um, that are dangerous. Meat packing industry doesn't pay well, but you can certainly get hurt working in it. You can ask those kinds of questions. I don't think it's helpful to say that's the beast.
Yeah, fair enough.
but to read alongside the kinds of concerns Revelation has.
Yeah. I mean, maybe this language too isn't helpful, but to somewhat say beasts in plural, like or even I wonder sometimes if even Antichrist is more helpful that way than to be like, there's the Antichrist, there's the Antichrist, but what are the Antichrist type, I don't know,
I think
typologies kind
what's
of, yeah.
beastly, it's
Okay, what's
similar.
beastly? Yeah, that would be good.
Beastly,
Okay.
right. Antichrist isn't a thing in Revelation, which is a weird thing, but beast is.
Yeah.
And for me, what's beastly? What's abusive? What's idolatrous?
Yeah. Okay. That's a better way of saying it. Uh, Kind of building off of that still, how does Revelation, if it does, help us think about political engagement today?
Yeah. So again, the author is of Revelation, John, is writing to these followers of Jesus who really have almost no political recourse, right? These are not elite people. Um, they are far from Rome itself. They might participate in like civic government and all that. And Revelation mentions none of it.
Hmm.
Just none of it. What it tells them to do is live faithfully. What it tells them to do is keep testifying to Jesus and following the ways of Jesus. Um, the one thing I would say that I think Christians today need to internalize from Revelation is that vision of the Lamb, in my opinion. And I think this is an incredibly important thing about our culture right now. There's this massive movement for Christians to, often you'll hear the leaders say, to have dominion or take dominion over society, sort of a top-down
Mhm.
kind of leadership among Christians. As far as I understand it, that's as far from the way of Jesus as I could imagine.
Can I
And
can I ask just to clarify with
yeah,
that?
well, I was just going to say one other
Okay.
thing and
Yeah.
come back.
Okay.
Um, and whereas in Revelation, it's just living it out faithfully. I'm
Okay.
sorry, Alan.
Oh no, I was just gonna ask, like, by Dominion, do you kind of mean like this idea that if we get enough people in political positions, then we can institute biblical principles and kind of put them down on everyone, no matter
Right,
their faith or beliefs?
right, right.
Is that kind of
Um,
the idea you're thinking that is the opposite of Revelation's approach?
I think it is.
Okay.
Um, but I wouldn't just say that it's just about laws. I mean, what we hear um, a lot in American Christianity is we want to be the head and not the tail.
Okay.
We want to have dominion over all the spheres of culture. You hear those kinds of things. And what Revelation's telling its audience is, this is 1:9, you're going through a hard time. You're experiencing hardship
Hmm.
on account of your testimony. But really, in God's sight, you're a whole empire of kings and priests. You don't need that other kind of power over. You are who you are in the light of your relationship with God and God's people.
You argue in the book that Revelation resists violence rather than glorifies it, and I feel like
Hmm.
we're already kind of dancing around that a little in some of these questions. How do you reconcile though that with Revelation's intense apocalyptic imagery?
Yeah. There's a lot of imagery of violence in Revelation, right?
Yeah.
And I would even say there's language that celebrates the violence,
Okay.
sometimes in Revelation. So if I'm going to argue for a reading of Revelation that's anti-violence, I've got to really, I've got a heavy pull. Um, I don't try to argue that there are no violence problems in Revelation. There does seem to be a desire for retribution against people who oppress the followers of Jesus. That seems to be part of the book. But what I will say is Revelation never calls the Lamb's followers to take up weapons and fight.
Mm.
It absolutely doesn't. They conquer by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. And the Lamb, even though he goes to war and gets very bloody, his only weapon is a sword, that comes from his mouth. In other words, his weapon is the truth.
Yeah.
And, we might even think back to gospel passages where Jesus says, I haven't come to bring peace but a sword. But he's not carrying the sword, it's his message that creates people responding with hostility and so forth. Um, I think that's where revelation is coming from. You're vulnerable. You should practice the way of Jesus. You should not participate in the idolatries of this society. Um, but that's far from asking people to, bomb the nearest temple or civic building.
Hmm. What do you make of I think we've already, this is another one that maybe that we've kind of danced around a little, especially in thinking about some of the bad assumptions or misteachings of Revelation. What do you make of the way Revelation has been co-opted so many times by popular culture, in films, politics, conspiracy theories, whatnot?
Right. That's a great question. At one level, nobody cares what I think about it because they're going to keep doing it. Right?
Fair enough.
But why? Why do they keep doing it?
Yeah.
And I think, there are certain topics that take us past ourselves,
Okay.
right? If you can imagine the end, if you can imagine death, if you can imagine collapse, you can play a lot of other things that you imagine off of those things. If I could give an example, because that sounded pretty distant, right? But if you read books about Revelation from like the late 60s, early 70s, the final battle was supposed to be related to the Cold War. It's going to be the Russians and the United States,
Sure.
right? They're reflecting their time, just like Star Trek reflects the time it was made. Um, if you read them in the 80s, oh no, it's Arabs. We've got a problem with Saddam Hussein into the 90s. You get oil crisis books. More recently, you get a preoccupation. In other words, what readers have done has been consistently to say, Revelation's talking about what we're going through right now.
Mm.
And then 10 years later, the same authors or speakers are going to be talking about something else, but they stay on that pattern. Um, I think that Revelation has an appeal because it imagines a total collapse of history and a totally alien heavenly world breaking into the world and making things right. And that just makes it really a primary place an author or a filmmaker could go to, right? To play out all these other human things. They've done it with asteroids, they've done it with climate change, they've done it with nuclear war.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a good point.
I think we just have a way of doing that.
You described Greg Revelation as a queer book.
Yes.
I would love to, if I can, just a moment of conversation with you with this one
Yeah.
for I don't know your background too much except that you did mention again kind of transitioning from
Yeah.
Baptist to
Yeah.
wherever you've landed now. For those of us who come from pastor and even traditional theological backgrounds, could you clarify what you mean by queer here? Are you using it as a metaphor for strangeness and disruption, or as a statement about gender and sexuality?
It is a statement about how Revelation imagines gender and sexuality.
Okay.
So, part of my own journey is that I've been influenced a lot by LGBTQ plus Christians
Okay.
who, and how they interact with the Bible and theology, has been important to me. But also, there one aspect of Revelation that scholars have been working on a lot for over 30 years is how Revelation represents women.
Okay.
In chapter 14, it says that the followers of the Lamb have not defiled themselves with women. It is Revelation imagining a celibate community of men. Why would we talk about sex as being defiling? What what kind of thing is going on here? And then Revelation uses four symbols that are female, right? There's Jezebel, who is a false prophet, named after the Jezebel of the Jewish scriptures. You have, and she's called promiscuous and dies on a bed. The woman clothed with the sun is giving birth. Babylon, the prostitute, is a prostitute. And the New Jerusalem is a bride. So the only way Revelation talks about women are their sexual status. You're getting married, you're giving birth, or you're sexually out of bounds, immoral. Um, that's not helpful in thinking about gender. And when you pair it with um, they didn't defile themselves with women, that's interesting. And so what I do in this chapter is try not to make any of that language okay or not okay,
Okay.
but to notice that there are some aspects of Revelation that don't map neatly with the way ancient people thought about gender and sexuality.
Okay. Did
That's
can I,
really what I'm doing by calling it
did
queer.
you write that chapter? I don't know. It's did you I don't know what kind of pushback either or
Sure.
what it's been like since it's come up, but did you write that kind of expecting like even at SBL, did you expect like, okay, the SBL panel on this one might be interesting
I
or were
in
you
an
working on the
academic
shoulders?
setting, not so much.
Okay. Were you working on the shoulders even of people who have said similar things?
Oh,
That
definitely.
maybe okay.
So one scholar I greatly admire, who's a dear friend, is Lynn Huber,
Okay.
who has an fairly new, just a couple of year old, two-volume commentary on Revelation.
Okay.
And throughout it, she uses queer reading strategy. She's been um, really important to me understand Revelation. Sarah Emanuel
Okay.
is another up-and-coming scholar. So yeah, in fact, at the end of that chapter, I say there's not much I say here that someone else hasn't said.
Okay.
It's what I'm trying to do to put it together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask one question of kind of hypothetical
Yeah.
pushback? How do you respond to those who worry that applying queer theory to Revelation could risk reading contemporary categories into an ancient text that maybe didn't share our modern frameworks or identity and sexuality?
So I think that's the perfect way to ask that question.
Okay, I
So
appreciate that.
thank you. Yeah. So I think if we're going to be responsible readers of the Bible, we're always aware that there's a massive cultural difference between our own moment and the moments of those biblical authors. And we want to understand that cultural difference as well as we can. On the other hand, we're bringing our questions to the Bible. And that's what Christians and Jews have always done is bring our questions to the Bible. So what I would argue for isn't that there's some way to read the Bible that's neutral, that's distant from the assumptions that we carry and the questions we bring. When you teach Intro to New Testament to seminary students, immediately they're confronted with the reality of, oh, I've made all these assumptions about the Bible.
Hmm.
What I think we need to do is realize that we have these questions and assumptions and hold them openly and lightly enough that we bring them to the text, not knowing what the product's going to be. You know, what's going to happen when I bring these questions here?
Yeah.
For me, it wasn't a set of questions I brought to Revelation. It's what other readers
Okay.
called my attention to. And then you start looking like, oh, this is interesting to me.
Maybe you've answered this question in that one already, but I'll ask it nonetheless. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I expect that as you read this, you weren't trying to alienate one group of pastors and scholars. And you also, I'm guessing, weren't writing this expecting that this is going to be, the book that changes their mind on all these things. So for pastors and readers who hold, if I could just call like a maybe a traditional biblical sexual ethic, what do you hope they might still take away from your chapter? Uh, in other words, what kind of understanding or empathy do you hope that this chapter especially fosters, even for those who might disagree with you?
I would say two things.
Okay.
One, I'm 60 years old, so I have watched this happen where a particular construct of what people call traditional gender roles, whether they call them complementarian or not, has become the dividing point in many churches. An insistence that wasn't there when I was 20 and was definitely there by the time I was 30. I've watched that happen.
Okay.
What I would ask is, how well are those of us among us who would say, I'm for traditional biblical values on gender and sexuality? How much have we subjected our assumptions about what that means to some historical and biblical scrutiny? So I think it would be healthy, even for pastors who think sex should wait until after marriage, it should be a man and a woman and just them for life. Um, are the ways we're talking about what it means to be male and female biblical? Are they healthy?
Yeah.
Or are we recycling what people have sold us over a period of time?
Yeah, that's a fair way of framing it. Can I just say, Greg, in some ways, my mind, my heart's like, you should say this privately, but no, I'd rather say
Yeah,
it like this. So I just to lay all my cards on the table. Like I just resigned from my church so we could move to Florida, but a complementarian uh pastoring in the Southern Baptist Canadian version of Southern Baptist,
sure.
like the SBC planted the
Right.
denomination in Canada that we were a part of now. So I mean, you can just imagine where, yeah, I don't know where I would land on a lot of these things up until now. But all saying that, I just want you to know, like, I have appreciated this book thoroughly,
Well,
and truly appreciated. I forget which chapter it is, but the things we've just been talking about, the uh, Revelation as a queer book. I just, even just for the same reason of this conversation, like
right.
I want to be able to conversate with and think about things. I don't know, outside of constructs that, yeah, I am, don't know you, but in our conversation, I fully expect that we will both be in the throne room of God, no matter where we land on some of these things. So again, you don't know me, and I'm one voice, but I hope you value that like uh, from where I don't know, stand, speak from,
Mhm.
teach from. This is I've loved your book. I
Thank
haven't
you.
found that or the book or the chapter by any means alienating. I found it inviting into a deeper conversation. Uh, and maybe it was just a reminder too that like, I think that for my, I don't know what to call it, camp position, whatever, the LGBTQ plus world can lose some of its humanity and just seem like I don't know, a title, forget that there's real people behind these late. So I don't know how to say it, but just that chapter was very, I know it was helpful for me to remember. Oh yeah, there's legitimate Jesus loving, God fearing scholars, men and women studying Revelation, landing in these places. Like, yeah, I'm just rambling, but I just appreciate you. I appreciated the book and that chapter. Uh,
That's
Even though it
incredibly.
was a surprising one for me
Yeah.
to read. Yeah,
I can remember being surprised when I heard some things for the first time too. But what I really want to emphasize is how gracious and kind that reading was on your part. So thank you. It's important to me that I have good, strong relationships with colleagues who would identify as more traditional, more evangelical, um, who know that when we disagree, it's just we're just disagreeing,
Yeah.
or maybe we're coming at something from different perspectives. But one example, I just learned David De Silva, who's a good friend of mine,
Okay.
works on Revelation a lot, just launched a Substack with a series of reflections on Revelation. And it means a lot to me that David would reach out to me about it, that, he knows things we disagree about. We've
Yeah.
footnoted each other disagreeing.
Fair enough.
And that's fine, but that is far from the main thing.
Yeah. Yeah. In the town that I just left, we had not the strongest ministerial, but a good group of
Mm.
pastors in the town that was very meaningful to me. And a big part of that group was an Anglican pastor, a United pastor, like a number of high church where we disagreed on so many
Oh,
things. But I just, yeah, I love those guys. I know I could call them at the drop of a hat. They supported my ministry, we supported theirs. Uh, and the hope there too was to try and portray to our congregations that like we don't have to divide over everything.
and how do we
As you say,
recover
we can
that?
disagree.
How do we recover that? I can remember assuming, right, that there was goodwill across Christian groups where I grew up.
Yeah.
And we don't have that same, we're not in that place right now, at least in the US.
Okay. Well, yeah, I hope I just gotta imagine that it took boldness to include that chapter. I don't know, maybe not, but I appreciate you doing it just because it represents what your thinking is and where you're at. I think it would be a disservice if you came to this and out of fear did not include that.
Thank you. And also I'll add loyalty to friends who have taught me.
Sure.
Um, this is very personal, but they're mid 40s up until then, I had thought, and this has everything to do with how I was raised to be a man. I thought you work hard enough at it, you do it right, you stay and stay and stay,
Hmm.
and you'll overcome whatever, I might not have said it out loud or judged some, but and then I ran into, I won't talk about the situations because they're other people's
Sure.
lives
Yep.
where I didn't have the power to just power through it.
Hmm.
And I had to acknowledge that I was sort of held back by the way I'd been told what it meant to live as a man in the world and had to be able to be more vulnerable and
Hmm.
live through it.
Well, just to wrap up, Grady, I appreciate you having that conversation with me. Uh, the last thing I wanted to do was to ask those questions somehow make you feel like I'm trying to corner you
Not at
into
all.
saying something. So I
Not at
appreciate
all.
the back and forth. If John of Patmos could speak to the church today, and maybe this is just kind of summarizing what you've said, what do you think he would say?
Um, I think it would, I mean, there are lines in Revelation, you think you're rich now, but you're not.
Hmm.
Um, that we want to hold on to security so hard and not take a look at the ways our churches and our lives are out of alignment with the love that God has for every person, every being. I think we need to hold ourselves up to examination in front of Revelation.
Amen. Well, thanks for the conversation, Grade. Thank you so much for the book. Yeah, I will. I've read it now, but I feel like I'm not trying to make a pun with the title, but I
Oh
feel like
no.
I will reread uh rereading Revelation. So appreciate your contribution to the field of Revelation studies and into the church.
Thank you so much, Riley. It's been a pleasure.